each generation sort of accepts as their lot what they're given, and they hear about the good old days, but it's that mythical era. I didn't want my kids looking in a picture book and saying, "Hey Dad, what's that? Oh, it's a paua. Can we go see one?" Well, there's none left, sorry. I mean, to me, that would have been the biggest tragedy. And for a flat, ugly snail, they take a grip on your being, your soul, your karma. I mean, think about it. Why do they have all those brilliant colours on them? Whatever gets to see them? I can't explain, but sort of being that deep that you've got no buoyancy and drifting down a face and getting sort of a bit like the Aborigines' dream time. And really not feeling any need to breathe and having to remind yourself that the air and safety is up there, but it felt just right. Hugely at peace, in a yummy place, beautiful visibility. Well, hell, it was damn near as good as sex, and there's not many things that I say that about. Sorry. I've been very well off 3 times. In fact, I've been a millionaire 3 times, but me and money seem to have a fairly brief association. Apparently I'd taken off when I was 9 months old, and the whole of Palmerston was out searching for me. They found me a mile down the railway track asleep under a rock. They're sort of taken off and doing exciting or adventurous things. It's been a defining factor in my life. First job realistically was probably joining the Navy, which perhaps wasn't a good idea for a radical free thinker like me. I wasn't very good with the discipline side. I took on a bit of a anti-feeling towards authority, which has sort of to some degree stayed with me throughout my life. It wasn't a job, it was a life. And it was good. My workspace was the sea. It's never the same. And really it was, well, which yummy place am I going to go and work today? Paua divers were the flotsam of the fishing industry. They weren't considered proper fishermen. Essentially, you were almost the highwayman of the sea. There was a cartel of Sea Lord Salmon Smith, Biolab and Watties, and they totally controlled the industry. They brought the pauas off us for next to nothing, bleached them, turned them into something that tasted putrid, and put them in cans and sold them mostly in Hong Kong. There were murmurings of a quota system coming into effect. Paua were not on that quota system. It just all seemed wrong. So I started agitating and writing to people.
I was running the magazine that we started, and we started this column, Abalone. He came up with some amazing stuff. It was all focused on saving the resource, better managing fisheries.
This is an animal that sticks to a rock. It doesn't swim around. It's not going to miraculously recover if you fish it out.
He was talking about a whole lot of things that years later only just starting to be put into train now, only just starting to be realised. Mac at his own expense bought thousands of tiny paua from a paua farm and reseeded them in an area down the Otago coast. If we don't start doing things like this, he used to say, we'll never do anything.
I was just looking for a place where we had access to pauas that me and the wife and the two kids, 3 and 4, could actually live for a prolonged period of time. We were actually on our way to Curio Bay in Waikawa because I'd fished out of there before, and this was just a stop on the way that turned into 8 months. I don't think you can get a better house than this. You know, money can't buy this sort of place. And living in a tent here and having that freedom of, well, what will we have for tea tonight? Will we have rabbit? Will we have goat? Will we catch a flounder? Will the kids and I go fishing? Oh, absolutely brilliant. Even when it was pissing down with rain and we couldn't get out because the river was swollen and all that sort of thing, there was still a great sense of freedom that you don't often get these days. And then I went for a trip over to Australia and met ab divers there, and all of a sudden discovered that paua divers in New Zealand were the only abalone fishermen in the world that were poor.
I was working in a research laboratory in Tasmania at that time. One day the president of the Tasmanian Abalone Association pulled up in his 2-seater Lamborghini. Mad Mac and Tony hopped out and came in to see me in my little research laboratory. He was still living under canvas and living on a beach, diving straight out the front, and one got to wondering why the Australian abalone divers were driving around Lamborghinis.
They were all wealthy compared to us because there were no cartels there. They were actually able to sell with only one middleman who didn't overwhelmingly control the price. When I saw what was wrong, I thought a co-op was the way to go.
He was trying to elevate fishermen, that's paua fishermen, from being peasants who dive for paua into getting more of the reward. They were just selling off to companies who controlled things. He was trying to break that down so the fishermen could be masters of their own destiny to a far greater degree than they ever were.
When I was able to demonstrate to them that they were losing $29.20 per kilo compared to our Australian counterparts, all of a sudden people were interested in this co-op idea that Mad Mac's got.
The whole philosophy of the cooperative was that every last cent of profit would go back to the diver.
And all of a sudden, paua divers around the country were talking to each other. Colin Moyle was the Minister of Fisheries. We kept knocking on his doors and saying, well, there's no level playing field for us. There's a cartel of 3. We believe we can do a better job ourselves. Will you let us export the stuff? Over a long period of time, he agreed with that and eventually agreed to allow a trial export of 2 tonne of paua meat per applicant. And all of a sudden we moved into this new era of Frankly speaking, more money than a bull could shit. I must admit, I got really spoilt at that stage. I seriously wouldn't go fishing unless I could make $30,000 or $40,000 in that day. We've gone from bums to bloody these peasant kings who were just blowing dollars and having a ball.
A lot of the guys that all of a sudden have become cash rich, you know, and I mean, they just lost the plot.
I think for a few years we really contributed to the economy big time because we were spent.
The normal thing was to go fishing, earn a heap of money, then get on the terps for a week and spend that, and then go fishing again.
And I sort of figured out pretty early on, hell's bells, I spent $38,000 with the Southland Aero Club. I could buy an aeroplane for that, so I did.
He'd load the pauas into the plane and they'd be getting along the beach, and the pilot would be wondering why it wasn't taking off quite as good as it would, and Mac had just sort of dropped another bin of fish in just to top up the load, you know.
It wasn't till they weighed them that I realised I'd put 3/4 of a tonne in the damn thing. Now the payload for a Piper Super Cub is 880 kilos.
The plane's sinking quietly towards the sea and he'd be throwing pauas out the window. Oh, it'll fly, it'll fly. That's the man, he's a hard thing.
I'd always been interested in fetishes, high heels, satin, slinky things, all that sort of thing. So I went over for the Dress to Thrill ball in LA, and then I went over for another do in New York. I was only away 3 or 4 weeks and cost me $83,000. Was it worth $83,000? Quite probably not. But at the end of the day, that's where my adage that it's just paper with ink on it comes into it. There was never anything flashy, I don't think, about my spending. I just took it for granted that when it was all gone, I'd make it again.
Frustrating. To see what he did was totally frustrating. We tried to put quota aside that he couldn't touch. We tried to put it in trust because we could see the trend, like on his farm. He'd build this place to store his wine underground and all sorts of extravagances.
All my life I'd said, why would anyone spend 20 grand on a bloody motor car? Yet I went out and bought a $20,000 Trans Am and absolutely loved it, and drove it on gravel roads until it fell apart. And I had a mistress who I'd told I was never leaving my wife, but I spent about 3 or 4 days a week with her. So I thought, if I'm paying for it, and at that stage I could afford it, I'm not being unfaithful. I mean, it's interesting what guys will convince themselves of in order to cover their asses. My accountant said to me, Mac, it's, you know, it's costing you too much money. And I decided I'd spent that much money in massage parlours that I should actually buy one. Unfortunately for me, what the girls were good at, they were good at, and what they were bad at, they were even better at. And I absolutely bombed out. I'd watched the old Wild West movies, and I'd seen the madams with the golden hearts and all that sort of thing, and I believed it. And I didn't realise how seedy and sordid it could be. But I wasn't the normal sort of sleazy parlour owner in that means that I have to try you out first. There was never any of that. In fact, I was scared of them. You put your mind to it and you focus blindly on that. So if it was Christmas Day and the family had an arranged function, but I could see that we could make $20,000, $30,000 that day, then I was going fishing, because you might not be able to make it next week. So my job always came before the family, which is probably a shocking thing for people to hear me say, but that's how passionate I was. To me, that was our livelihood. So if that was the day, it didn't matter what arrangements we'd made, I was going fishing. I think human beings in our life cycle have been used to going into places nomadically, cleaning them out and then clearing off to somewhere else for 20 years. Trouble is, we're not mobile like that now. We've got too good at what we're good at, and when we wipe something out, we wipe it out for good. The major complaint that I would target at the government is you never made sure that this resource was well managed for the benefit of New Zealand and New Zealanders. You just let everybody and their dog rape it. I mean, have a look at it. The most obvious thing is that there should have been quota management on pauas, but there wasn't until the industry itself stood up and said, we're the most vulnerable. If you're going to manage anything by quotas, we need to be managed by quotas. We forced them into putting us high on the list. We weren't even on the list. And all of a sudden, paua quota, which was just a piece of paper, became worth astronomical money, $30,000 a tonne. That might seem like peanuts these days, but that was just for the right to catch it. It was a 20-cent piece of paper. We couldn't believe that this piece of paper was worth so much bloody money. And I think it was also the downfall to some degree of the industry, because every weekend diver and his dog wanted to become a paua diver then. The co-op very quickly became attractive to a number of businesses and entities. I thought the bank was just being nice when they invited me along to Pink Gins. You know, it didn't register with dumb old Mac that the reason you're being invited along, you peasant you, to these after hours Westpac Pink Gins is because of all the money you're putting through. No, they're inviting you along because you're a nice guy. Bullshit. It was one of the tragedies, was that we weren't used to that sort of money. We were open slather for anybody with any business understanding, and some of them did take advantage of us. Other companies would pay 10 or 15 cents a kilo more than we were paying, and God help me, our members would go down the road and sell to the opposition, and they never ever seemed to understand the concept that they were actually blowing up their own company. I can't sit here and say it was the members' co-op and then say it was my baby, but when you put that much energy into something, you don't really want to see it die.
We had to become more commercial to survive with the players that we were competing against, and Mac probably wasn't the person to stand in that position.
My problem in the co-op, I believe, was that I didn't recognise when it was time to just quietly walk away, Mac, and be grateful for what you did. I can remember the wind-up meeting down south with huge embarrassment. They gave me a very, very nice barometer, but I stood up and said, don't do this, guys. It's all I've got. What else am I going to be remembered for? If you decide to champion any cause, at the end of the day, it will crush you. They didn't really have me as a father. I mean, look, that's the brutal honesty. I was away fishing most of the time or whatever, and I really wasn't there as a father. instead of just saying, I don't think we're right for each other, I spat the whole lot out. And eventually she divorced me. I used to have this saying, you know, money's just paper with ink on it. Reality is, that's true. But I am bothered that if I just kept 10%, what I'm doing these days would be an awful lot easier. Have I had a dive in the places I used to? No. Do I want to? No. To be quite honest, I've been back to a number of places and I find it brings me down quite a bit to see the seascape desert, because I've got a mind picture of what it is, and it isn't. Wish I could have done it better. Really? Look, I could waffle on, and I'm good at it, as you know. I could waffle on, but I think the best thing I could say would be I wish I could have done it better.
I've given all I have to this wild and stubborn land. Given all I have to the company man. To the coast I flew once with a fire in my soul, where the southern wind it blew and the mighty ocean rolled. And somewhere off the South Cape I was taken by the storm. Somewhere out there drifting where the white-capped soul is born. She asked a heavy price and then a heartbeat I had paid. And when I looked
if you're raping the resource, there's only one end result, no resource. For a long time I thought that I'd failed in getting that message through, but in hearing what some of the modern divers involved in the industry are saying, maybe it did get through, and maybe I can claim some small credit for having started that, conserve the resource and look after it.
45 knots ceased ruggedly. And any heart that's been lost out on the stormy sea has walked this earth alone. I knew I was born to ride the roaring sea and rolling tide, but I'm not coming home. Out on them waves I'm bound to be. 45 knots ceased ruggedly. On the sea, Lord, on the sea. 45 knots ceased ruggedly.
It's a self-fulfilling philosophy to say you can't. When I told the Federation of Commercial Fishermen I'd be growing industrial hemp in New Zealand, they all laughed at me and said never in our lifetime.